Elementary students in parts of Quebec returned to the classroom today after weeks of lockdown from COVID-19. Classrooms look a little different, though, than they did prior to the outbreak. Only 15 students are allowed in each room, and desks are spaced at least 2 meters apart. But the province is still reporting the highest cases of COVID-19 in the country. So is it too soon? We've got our press gallery panel here to weigh in. Kevin Gallagher is a reporter with CTV News here in Ottawa. TONDA MACCHARLES is a star reporter with the Toronto Star. And joining us as a special guest is Tom Mulcair, former NDP leader and now CTV News political analyst. Welcome all. Wonderful to see you. I know you can't see me anymore. This is COVID-19. But Tom Mulcair, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of Premier François Legault's argument that given the majority of deaths in Quebec are sadly happening in long-term care and nursing homes and are concentrated in Montreal, reopening elementary schools outside of the city is a reasonable step?
Well, I can tell you that a couple of my grandchildren started back to school this morning because they live in the Laurentians. And of course, everybody's worried about that, because Mr. Legault is always trying to make that case that, oh, it's mostly in the long-term residences. But the city of Montreal has one of the worst records in the world for deaths per unit of population from COVID-19. So people are worried because he's telling them, oh, you know what, you can go out of Montreal and into the countryside again. The countryside that he's just said is safer because it has far fewer cases. So they're not reassured. On Thursday, they came in with new rules saying, well, families will be allowed to go visit their loved ones in these residences, but they'll have to be tested first for COVID-19, and only one person will be allowed. Friday, they threw that rule out. They didn't have to be tested anymore. And all day today, families have been back into residences that did not have COVID-19, and there's no checking being done of who's going in there. So it's very hard to follow the logic of these moves by the Quebec government.
Well, I mean, I beg to say that it's hard to follow this reasoning in a lot of provinces. Tonda, I want to go to you. Our colleague Geneviève Beauchemin was standing in front of one of those schools this morning and saying that only 1 in 5 students are showing up. Obviously, it's parents who are not bringing them to school today. Maybe they're waiting. I don't know what. But Quebecers don't seem to be on board with this. Is the Premier not reading the room?
Well, look, I mean, we've heard that in this region, in the National Capital Region. I mean, schools on Ontario side are not open. Schools on the Quebec side open today. And even there, the parents we've heard from on the local radio shows and whatnot are just, they're terrified. They don't actually trust that the school is yet a safe environment for their children. So perhaps Monsieur Legault is misreading the room. But, you know, everybody's kind of making it up on the fly. Everybody, it's stick your toe in the water, see what happens. And I think that all of the provinces, all of the premiers, I've been speaking in the last couple of days to premiers' offices across the country, and, you know, they all know that they have to pounce on an outbreak if it happens, but they also all very much know they need to want to open their economies, you know, in a staged way and have the capacity to respond. I think that's the piece that we don't know. How well will they respond to outbreaks?
And Kevin, the lifting of restrictions, as Tonda says, can be a little bit confusing, even for the Premier of Ontario, who said today his daughters came to visit for Mother's Day yesterday. So is it a double bubble in Ontario? We thought it was just in New Brunswick and in other parts. Is it hard to follow what we can and can't do?
I think that there needs to be a little more clarity for sure, Joyce. I mean, certainly it would be different if the Premier of Ontario had 2 people who are over 65 years of age over for Mother's Day. But, you know, in this case, we don't even know exactly what is right and wrong here. I think that as things reopen, there needs to be a lot more concentrated messaging on what proper behaviors are if you're entering a store, if you're going out to one of these new businesses that haven't been open for a while, and also if you're planning to have some sort of social visit. To what extent can you do that? Can you have people in your backyard spaced out 2 meters apart or not? Can you only visit with certain people in your family and not others? Should you just, as we heard the Prime Minister sort of suggest today, not continue to see grandparents? These are tough decisions that families need to make, and frankly, everyone needs a little guidance through that process, and I feel like there needs to be a lot more clarity on the proper ways to behave during this pandemic.
And Tom Mulcair, you know, today we heard Trudeau say, as a Quebecer, an MP from Montreal, he's worried about the province's reopening plans. He said it openly. Is this going to cause more friction between the two governments?
No, because François Legault went out of his way to say the exact same thing to take pressure off Prime Minister Trudeau. Yves-François Blanchet, the head of the Bloc Québécois, tried to make us stink about this over the weekend, saying, oh, well, he's attacking Quebec. He's insulting us. He's telling us that he's worried about yeah, if you look at Quebec's numbers, more than 60% of the deaths in Canada from COVID-19 are in Quebec. And Quebec's only got 22% of the population. So, yeah, the Prime Minister of Canada is allowed to say he's very worried about the situation in Montreal. And frankly, it was gracious of Mr. Legault to simply echo those exact words. He says, I'm worried about it as well. Everybody who's thinking about this is worried about Montreal. So that gave a little bit of, it took some of the pressure off Mr. Trudeau that the Bloc was trying to put on him. And frankly, I think that Yves-François Blanchet didn't come out of this looking very good by trying to start a classic constitutional dust-up when all people want to be talking about now is how can we save lives and make this a safe passage out of this pandemic for all Canadians.